If all you know about the late actor Don Knott is his role as bumbling comic foil Deputy Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show, then you'd probably be pretty surprised to learn he was evidently quite the sex symbol of his day, albeit a rather reluctant one. Yup, we're talking about the same Don Knott, not some kind of sophisticated, buff, chiseled-chinned heartthrob who happened to bear the same name, but this guy. Comedians have never been particularly known for being sex objects. In fact, the default setting of most comics is one of sexual inadequacy. Sure, there have always been swaggering jokesters who like to flaunt their sexual conquests, but the majority of memorable comics have been pathetic losers who can't seem to score with the ladies. Take the comedy duo of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. In their films, Martin always seemed to be after one thing, whereas Lewis wasn't anything like a sexual predator. He was simply there to provide comic relief, something he did expertly. During the post-Code era, many romantic comedy films were notable for their happy endings. But these weren't all about wedding bells and honeymoons. They were the moment when the stars finally got a chance to sleep together. Sometimes these movies are called DF films, the D being for delayed and the F being short for something you can probably figure out on your own. For some comics, however, like Don Knott's, the delay was endless. Throughout his television and film career, Knott's never graduated from the D to the F. So why are we telling you that Don Knott was some kind of sex symbol? Join Facts Verse as we explore this perplexing question. The Nervous Man. Knott's often referred to his comic persona as the Nervous Man. The New York Times referred to this character in an article following his 2006 death as absolutely flappable. At first look, one might get the impression that Knott was a bit of a one-trick pony. While he always had those big, fearful, protruding eyes affixed to his wire-frame body, he was a lot more than just a bug-eyed goof. Much of his routine centered around his sexuality. The running joke was that he had no sexuality to speak of, primarily because of his pencil-thin frame. He would stutter profusely whenever he would stumble upon a voluptuous woman, such as in his 1967 film The Shakiest Gun in the West. But while sex seemed to be off the table for Knott, in truth, he was quite interested in it, and according to people who knew him personally, he managed to get it pretty often. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like, and subscribe to Facts First for more. And stick around for more about Don Knott. Knott's fundamentalist background. Don's mother was a born-again Christian. During the Depression, fundamentalists of that era were vehemently opposed to sinful things like liquor, gambling, smoking, makeup, and Hollywood movies. Fortunately for Knott, his mother believed the opposition to movies was a bunch of hogwash, as she put it. According to his autobiography, his mom would take him to the cinema often. During those early days of film, Knott found himself drawn to films such as the Laurel and Hardy series. He also was quite fond of radio stars like Jack Benny and Edgar Bergen. As soon as he started training to become a performer himself, he honed in on ventriloquism as his shtick. His dummy, Danny, which was handcrafted for him by one of his neighbors, bore a striking resemblance to himself. When he joined the armed forces in WW2, Knott was so scrawny he had to sign a waiver just in case his training killed him. Since he listed his profession as ventriloquist, Knott was quickly assigned to the USO, where he and his wooden buddy Danny did a routine called Stars and Gripes. Once the war ended, Don moved to the Big Apple, where he wasn't able to afford to attend Broadway performances, but managed to score free tickets to radio shows fairly often. At those shows, he took mental notes and refined his own delivery. Eventually, he scored a role as a supporting character on an adventure radio program geared towards young boys. The movies he used to see with his mother did inspire him to become an actor, but it was Knott's prowess with vocal work that really helped him break through as a star. It was his voice and delivery, not his body, that helped kick off his career. Knott still developed a bit of a swagger. Knott's head, more than his body, was his most expressive body part. He had those huge bulging eyes, constantly pursed lips, and throbbing neck veins. Even in moments of action, his body rarely fulfilled comedic expectations. Take the film The Reluctant Astronaut, for example. His zero-G performance left much to be desired. The closest he ever got to flaunting his bodily bravado was in the film The Shakiest Gun in the West, in which there was a sequence where Knott, attempting to treat a female patient who insists on not opening up her mouth, tussles with the woman with his legs wrapped around her waist as she swings about wildly. Eventually, the camera cuts away. A resounding thud is heard, and the next thing we see is Knott crouching over the incapacitated patient as he performs his dental work. A few years later, Knott appeared in The Love God, a film that saw him portray a pornographer who, despite being surrounded by beautiful women in a fancy penthouse, never managed to have any luck with any of the ladies he lived with. The film received an M rating, and audiences were clearly not expecting Don to appear in such an overtly sexual film. He later appeared in a CBS special called The Don Knott's Nice, Clean, Decent, Wholesome Hour, which was his way of poking fun at his squeaky, clean-cut image. Don Knott was allowed a greater degree of sexual proficiency than you might remember. Barney Fife and his on-again, off-again girlfriend Thelma Lou would often end up making up after a spat with what Andy called smoochin' parties. In the episode Barney on the Rebound, Andy walked in on Fife and Thelma Lou alone together on a love seat in a dark room. Barney ends up jumping to the couch while Thelma Lou runs out. When Andy turns on the light, he finds Fife nonchalantly sipping a cup of coffee cross-legged with lipstick all over his face, his hair disheveled, and looking uncharacteristically relaxed. Barney then proceeds to explain that he and Thelma Lou had been talking. The joke here, of course, is that Fife had just been ravaged, becoming a sexual object instead of a more masculine subject. Whenever he would feel particularly confident, Fife would have this sort of self-assured swagger about him. Knott would later show off this side of himself on Three's Company when playing the wannabe swinger Mr. Furley. He also showed this kind of gusto in The Love God as he strutted his stuff wearing flashy outfits. Knott's daughter revealed he was loved by women all the time. Karen Knott wrote a memoir about her father titled Tied Up in Knots, My Dad and Me, which revealed he was quite the ladies' man. She called him magnetic and said women would often get lost in those big googly eyes. Her mother, Catherine Metz, was Don's first of 3 wives. Karen lived with her dad while she was in high school and noted he had a fairly healthy dating life. According to her, no woman was ever upset with him. Even if their relationship ended, they still adored him and remained friends with him. Knott's dear friend Al Chaco once referred to him as somewhat of a ladies' man who fancied himself as something like a Frank Sinatra. His first marriage to Metz lasted from 1947 to 64. He married his second wife, Laura Lee Chukchna, in 1974. That marriage ended in divorce in 83. He married his third wife, Frances Yarborough, in 2002. They remained together until Don's death in 2006. In between those marriages, Knox dated extensively and was often pictured surrounded by beautiful women. Don died at age 81 on February 24, 2006, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA from respiratory and pulmonary complications of pneumonia, which was brought on by lung cancer. Now it's time to hear from you. Was Don Knott really a sex symbol like some say he was? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.